Do you know what is keeping security teams up at night these days? AI agents. They are writing codes. There are MCP architectures connecting everything to everything. And then you also have applications running in production that you can't even see. They are flying blind. AI generated code is exploding. Agents are making business decisions on their own, and the old security playbook doesn't work anymore. So, how do you solve this? That's exactly what we're going to find out in today's episode of Agentic AI with Matan Bar-Efrat, CEO and co-founder of Rein Security. Matan, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Swapnil.
Matan, this is the first time you and I are talking, so I would love to know a bit about the company, the problem you're solving, and also the story behind the name.
Right, 100%. So why don't I start with a story and then I'll get to what is it that we actually do and the gap that we saw in the market. So first of all, Rein security is in reins, like reins to a horse. It means to contain. And the idea was, I saw all of the, security companies and generally, tech companies, they have 3, 4 letter word names that like a word that is misspelled or a word that doesn't really mean anything. And I thought I want something that means something that tells part of the story of the company itself. And the reins of the horse is really like what we are able to do, which is really contain the threat, protect the companies that the companies that we're working with, and basically take control. And you really take control with the reins, right?
Let's focus on the problem you're solving. When we look at modern security landscape, it might seem like security is a solved problem. There are so many tools out there, but clearly something was missing. What gap did you see in the market?
Looking at it technically, we have a lot of products around gateways, a lot of products around eBPFs. It's very clear that there is a very big gap in between. Looking at AI security is just one example with MCPs or with agentic AI that is now, taking the world by a storm. Whether it is, you're talking about OpenClaw or LangChain or, Microsoft Foundry, we are seeing enterprises using agents. Agents are really proliferating. The fact that you can only monitor the prompt, leaving you outside of the execution context, means that you have not enough understanding or bad understanding of what is the impact of a malicious prompt on your organization. And that is what that's what we're able to do. Bring that context, bring that data layer that gives you visibility, control, posture, compliance, and then, of course, dynamic guardrails for the AI world, while at the same time, this context solves an age-old problem within application security. Again, this context problem. So if I'm looking at API security or SCA or even SaaS, and we have many other categories here, they're all basing their solutions based on a very narrow perspective on the application, seeing only the network side, so the requests and the responses similar to the prompt, looking at syscalls like eBPF-based solutions, or looking at the code as it's written. Nobody tells the story of the application layer. And again, in this agentic world, it becomes, I would argue, the most important thing.
So what does your product actually look like? Can you walk us through how it works?
So Rein is basically a visibility layer that allows you to see everything and anything that your agent does, your application does, from the prompts that it receives, the API endpoints that it gathers data from, the database queries, the tools that it uses, again, talking about MCP and agents, and the actions that it actually performs, meaning network connections, binary executions, file system access, you name it. Anything that the agent does, that the MCP does, or that the application does, we're able to see it. We're able to then create complete inventory and discovery of agents, of MCPs, of applications, of libraries, of APIs, and then vulnerability management around that. We just saw the vulnerability with LangChain, and there was, I think this was in December or January released. We are seeing the same pattern emerging that we saw in classic application security, also now with enterprise agentic AI.
You're born in the cloud native AI native era. How has security evolved over the past few years? And what are the biggest blind spots that you are seeing today, especially with AI? Because AI can be both workload that needs production, and it can also be a powerful tool that can be used by both good and bad actors.
So let's start with how AI changed the game. I think quite obviously gave the advantage to attackers, both from a vulnerability exploitation perspective, and I think we saw, Anthropic's report, I think 10 days ago or so, where these models are just amazing at finding 0 days, and then to scale that with an agentic, let's call it workforce from a criminal's perspective, that is just huge, and it changes the dynamic, right? We used to call 0 days because it's like once in a while you find something that nobody knows about. But with AI, I think we should call them every days, right? So we're in a situation that we're going to see 0 days proliferating, both from the fact that we're writing so much code, right? The velocity of code has just exploded. We're writing so much code with AI. And on the flip side, AI, LLMs are amazing at finding vulnerabilities, automating the reconnaissance, automating the attack process. I think that has just changed the game completely. Not to talk about, I would say the inherent things about AI, meaning that these AI applications, agents, etc., they're at their core non-deterministic. So we don't have an expected outcome necessarily, right? And that is a very big problem if, again, and now I'm going into where I think we're lacking, where you have a prompt and you have an expected response. And that's all of the LLM gateways or let's say proxies. There are many methodologies around that, around protecting AI applications. I think that's where they lack. Because what you care about is not the response to the prompt, and it's very hard to then predict that. What you care about, what is the impact of that prompt or of that interaction on your environment, on your infrastructure, on your data, right? And that you can only get if you have the application context, its reasoning, the data that it used, etc. And that is, I think, a very, very strong part. What more I want to say, and I think that you said it perfectly, right? The fact that today security is embedded, the fact that today we're in a point that we want to enable developers to experiment. How do you do that if all you're doing is chasing them with PRs about vulnerabilities and PRs about CVEs and SAST findings that they need to POC and prove? Again, the velocity of code, it's just a different game with AI generated code. So I think the approach of looking at what is actually impactful, so which part of my code is actually running, which CVEs and libraries and functions are actually executing, in what way, how does that harm me? For example, if the payload is coming from an external API or an internal API, and then being able to then create a baseline that is dynamic and learns the behavior of the application. I think that is it's a game changer, right? Because then we can truly go back to the developer and say, hey, do what you want to do. We've got your back. And I think that is what Rein was built for.
Let's narrow this down. What are the most critical blind spots you are seeing in modern infrastructure and app security? Where does Rein Security fits into this picture?
Look, regulated industries tend to have everything hosted. So I wouldn't go as far as on-prem, yes, but that is also the case in some places. And I think coming with a native solution like what we have that doesn't require, even a cloud, and we have some deployments on self-hosted infrastructure, let's say, because of our agentless nature. That really allows them to gain that visibility and maintain their sovereignty, as you said it. I think what more is a lot of companies, again, going back to AI security, are using tools and methodologies that we've used before and just applying it, like using, for example, OpenTelemetry, very, very common. OpenTelemetry is in most cases sampling based and does not offer this comprehensive visibility. And just to give one example of compliance that I think is very common, let's say you have an AI agent that is responsible for pricing a contract, right, an insurance contract with a customer. You want to be able to go back and audit it and make sure that it didn't hallucinate and that the action that it made, again, could be harmful in terms of data access, connections, executions, etc. And the fact that it is all provable, and you can show, hey, here the agent made this decision because of this data consideration and reasoning. That is something that we can do at scale, right? And I think a lot of the challenge here is how do you do this at scale? Again, OpenTelemetry allows you to get so far, but it falls short. some companies that look into this space, and I've seen some solutions, I don't want to name any vendors, but they would take the data coming from OpenTelemetry, ingest it over an API, and send back data. So if you're talking about data sovereignty and if you're talking about compliance for highly regulated industries, that would not fly, right? Because it would mean that you're basically sending the most critical data of your customers and of yourself, right? So the data and the consideration of the agents around a specific customer business use case to an external vendor and then back. Of course, that doesn't fly, and that's obviously not our approach as well. Everything can be self-hosted by the customer.
A lot of security teams are smart people, but many legacy companies have been doing things the same way for years. Same
Right.
culture, same tools, but the landscape has changed, it has evolved. Have you seen a disconnect or
Right.
mismatch between how applications actually behave in production versus how security teams thinks that they should behave or they might behave?
100%. And I think it goes down to management and understanding what is the KPI that you're testing for, you're aiming for. If the KPI is, I don't know, you know, zero findings from a scanner, right? Or the KPI is, a broader understanding of the application, securing it from an impact perspective, managing risk. I think that is a very big difference. And of course, I mean, there are companies that can do both. I'm not saying don't look at the scanning results of all of these scanners, but I feel like a lot of times, and it's because of the amount of alerts and the amount of noise that we have, um, companies end up in a situation that is very difficult to maneuver, right? They are left with all of these findings and they need to then act on them on some way. And this puts them in a position that I think sometimes, right, pushes them away from the real goal, which is protecting the application, minimizing risk, enabling development, as we just spoke, right? So I think it's really crucial when you're building an application security program or any security program for that matter, what is it that we're optimizing for, right? And I think you need to be very clear on those goals.
Since you mentioned AI, there's a lot of AI generated code, and we are not going back. This is the new reality. How are these technologies like MCP, AI, API, they are making security even more challenging now for security teams?
Course, I mean, in terms of access, this has been a huge change, right? At the moment, what you have is that agents can access through MCP's tools and data, whether SaaS or hosted, with limited controls. I think it's getting better, and over the past year or so, also security solutions have gotten better, and also the security practices around securing MCPs have gotten better. I think still the main point there remains visibility. So understanding what I have in front of me. So for example, okay, I understand now that I have a cursor agent interacting with a Notion MCP. It goes through maybe a hosted MCP that manages all of that. Then it interacts with maybe the same user then interacts with an internal resource. So being able to understand that in terms of the data that and the access, so data and action, let's say, that these agents have and MCPs allow, are within the guardrails or within the I would say security considerations that we would like to have for the organization. And so we want to allow people to use MCPs, right? And I think Rain is a huge enabler in terms of using MCPs because again, in a very native agentless way, I can then monitor, understand exactly how the MCP behaves, which tools does it use, and in which context, right? So this specific user is using this specific tool to perform this specific action. And I think once you get there, you're in a very strong position to then baseline, create posture around that, and then it comes to it also enforce guardrails.
Let's talk about business impact. When security teams don't have real time production context, What are they actually missing? I mean, worst case scenario is that you get compromised and it's all over the internet. You lose revenue, you ruin your image. But beyond the worst case, what are the day-to-day business impact when security is not done right?
So I think the one example that I really like is about actually AI agents. I think it's just a lot of companies are now, we went through this adoption cycle where it started with general LLMs, almost B2C, and then productivity tools like Copilot, Cursor, coding agents. And now we're seeing agents that are acting as services. And sometimes they don't assume the identity of the person. So basically, they're just, replacing a person, replacing a business process. And just one example with a company that, we're working with, they're a commerce platform and they have a customer support agent, and this customer support agent then interacts with an internal agent that is responsible for refund, for example, many other processes, right? But specifically for refund. What if nobody's attacking you, but the agent itself is hallucinating? Because that's, it happens. Again, we're in non-deterministic space. And the impact, right, of that hallucination is data leakage, wrong, I don't know, wrong refund in terms of the amount of money that the person receives, etc. Right? That is an area. Some of it is very difficult to solve. Some of it, I think, many companies are working on. Our visibility, as I would say, the building block in order to provide this, I think, very strong business value, making sure that your agents are doing what they're supposed to do. And I think in commerce, that's what we're seeing today. I'm pretty sure that very soon we'll also have similar things in banking, in finance, and also, of course, there are all the internal agents that are doing internal business processes. But as long as it's customer facing, I think it just becomes extremely, extremely important to make sure that you're not deviating from what the agent should be doing in a specific context.
We are already in late February. Time flies. What's in your pipeline? Obviously, you can't share everything, but give us a teaser. What can we expect
100%.
from Rein Security this
So
year?
I'll say again, putting aside the application security stack, where I think we have just, um, I was the most competitive offering I've seen from, especially from a startup, but I would say overall, complete API security, inventory discovery, authentication, authorization, all that, complete SCA, including reachability, exploitability, and actually the fact that we can actually see the line of code that is running, the function that is running. We're also doing SAST reachability now, so meaning I take away a lot of the noise. I start from a point of view that the code that is actually executing, and from that point onwards, I can share the specific vulnerabilities. So basically, it's an area that has been suffering from a lot of noise. Putting all that aside, I think that our main focus now is around the agentic world. Today, we already support in production MCPs, agents, and the interaction between them. Let's call them service to service. Uh, I think looking into that space more and more, we need to focus, and we are already focusing on the identity side. I think a lot of the challenges that we're going to have and are already seeing in agent security or agentic security is actually almost like a business logic problem. So what you really need to understand is the specific context of the access, meaning a specific user from a specific user group is now executing for a specific resource. So again, network connection, binary execution, what have you. And that is something that is a main focus for us. And looking ahead, we're constantly up to date, working with a few customers already. So we're I would say at the forefront of AI security at the moment.
Matan, thank you for joining me and sharing your insights about Rein Security. It's an evolving field, so I would love to have you back on the show, but I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
All right. All right. Thank you so much.